So to wrap up our first episode, we kind of got into the budget and how we were talking about all of that and a little bit of where the money is going and just kind of the scope of how much of the money is going to the defense budget and how that could potentially affect our deficit. You said doubling it, Nick?
Eventually our debt, doubling it.
Yeah, so just kind of a wrap up of that. On this next one, we're going to kind of dive into the dystopian themes of how the military has this amazing idea and kind of the effects and reality of that. So I know you had some really good points about that, Nick.
Yeah, so when I think of the military, and I think of the utopian ideal that the military is trying to live up to, and it's one that I think we can all get behind, right? The military as protectors of freedom and bastions of democracy and justice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look at like how normal citizens treat military members.
Exactly.
Thank you for your service. That's usually one of the first things out there.
100%, right? We honor these men and women that serve our country. I mean, for a good reason, because they are an important part of that, part of defending the way we live. But we say that, that's the ideal, is that they're constantly upholding democracy. I think that's the easiest way to put it. But the question then becomes, is it really living up to that? And how possibly could the military-industrial complex be hurting that? And the first thing I think of what about in the United States?
Mm-hmm. Kind of just the effects, the immediate effects.
What are the effects in the United States of the way our spending and acquisitions currently works?
Okay.
And the first thing that jumps to my mind is something that tons of people are upset about in more than just the military side, but also in terms of dealing with oil and environmental issues, lobbying.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge thing.
Right? I mentioned earlier how in the military-industrial congressional complex, lobbying plays a role in it, right? These defense contractors are going to give money to the Congress people. All of a sudden, right off this, and this is not unique to this, but it is still an element of it, that our country is being run by people who are more loyal to the businesses than to the people they represent.
Mm-hmm. Kind of just, like you said earlier, loyal to the money. And because these congressmen are probably getting paid millions of dollars to pass these actions for defense companies, and it's not, again, not unique to just this.
Yeah.
They're being loyal to businesses rather than the people that they represent. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up a whole new dystopian thing of, our legislators are supposed to be these people that represent us and have our best interests at heart, and then they really don't.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them may. I'm very cynical about that. But when we look at that, right, they're spending this money, and then the other thing is part of our democracy also, that breaks it down a little bit, right?
Okay.
Right, that's a little bit of a breakdown of our democracy because we're not being properly represented.
So this is, like you said, a threat to our democracy.
Yeah, and more than that, when we increase the spending, we're not spending it in other areas, right? And the other areas I'm going to point out are assistance to those less fortunate. And when we're talking about the people, that don't have good access to food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, education.
Kind of the forgotten parts of America.
Exactly, right? These forgotten people. When we're spending all this money on our military, this is one of the places that we spend a lot of money, right? 15% of our budget goes here. We're not spending it on those other people. And one of the essential parts of democracy, one of the building blocks, is having an educated population.
Okay.
Right? Having an informed population that can make informed decisions and is able to critically analyze situations and really think through problems. Because what we're saying in our country is that every single person has some element of a say in what happens.
Yeah, and that's what makes it great.
Exactly. But the thing is that if everybody has a say, then it's really important that everybody is educated enough to understand the issues and not have these really, shall we say, I don't want to say uneducated, but
No, that's the word for it. And like, this reminds me of a class I took last quarter
yeah,
titled Elections, and kind of how the whole election process works. And the reasons for why people vote largely depend on other people. And a lot of the decisions, the way it appealed to me was that they were pretty uneducated. So if you were to say, if you were to like half know something and kind of make a statement, your friends would believe you pretty much, and they'd automatically assume you're more educated in the topic. I should listen to you. I should vote for this person or for this thing, rather than kind of making informed, educated guesses regarding policies and people. And it's kind of something that's really blown up in the last decade or so, I'd say. Especially with the rise of social media, where you can tailor, yeah, it's a huge topic, I know, and we can spend hours talking about that. I just want to touch on it a little bit.
okay.
But you can tailor like your newsfeed to see anything that you want to see while excluding the other side, which is cool and all, but doesn't open the door for discourse between people and ideas.
Yeah, and so, you know, you have these people, and when we talk about, well, some people, I could definitely hear someone be like, well, why do we worry about the uneducated? You know, maybe you're overreacting. You know, I feel like I'm not really, because a huge reason why Trump got elected, and I'm not a fan of Trump, is because of these alienated people with, you know, little education who were sold.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at what he says, he tells half-truths all the time. Sometimes they're even quarter truths, all right? Like, this guy doesn't have the best track record, and as you mentioned, you know, people are willing to listen to someone who tells a half-truth because it's like, wow, I'm gonna listen to them. And so, maybe we should be spending a little bit more money on making sure that these people have the access to the education that they do. And I know I've been harping on education really hard. It's something that's core to my identity and my family. But also, if somebody doesn't have access to regular food and shelter, how are they ever going to worry about how our government works?
Yeah, for sure. Again, like Maslow's, I know
Yeah.
you're probably going to touch
Yeah,
on
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If I'm worried about where my next meal's coming from, I don't care whether Donald Trump builds a wall or not.
that.
Right? I don't have the time to worry about how a Supreme Court justice is chosen,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And that is a fundamental lacking, that causes a fundamental, I don't know, deficiency in our government,
Mm-hmm.
where all of a sudden our democracy doesn't function the way it should.
No, because that education is just non-existent.
Yeah. And my argument is that because we spend so much money on this and not on other things, I think the money could be better spent elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way the military-industrial complex works, because of the way that we're constantly throwing out these huge defense contracts, and because it provides jobs for manufacturers, you know, you mentioned the two C-130 bases and how there's whole towns that their whole economy is based on the military bases.
Yeah.
And getting that money.
For sure. I mean, you can even, sorry to
Yeah,
another
go.
tangent, you can even look at Seattle and like our history with Boeing.
Yeah.
Like, it's huge part of our economy here. And like, for that to kind of disappear, it's going to take a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we've given Boeing special tax breaks and special exemptions just to keep them here because they give our people jobs and they keep money in the economy. And what is that? I mean, what does that do? That just that hurts the rest of Seattle because all of a sudden we're losing tax revenue.
Yeah, from the tax. Yeah. Yeah, it certainly does. And it's kind of a hard question because I feel like it's kind of forcing you to choose between jobs and education when it shouldn't be that way.
No, it shouldn't. It really, really shouldn't. And I think that educating people is one of the highest priorities we can have. I can't remember. It was maybe the Brookings Institute. I can't remember which think tank it was. They came out with the 3 keys to success in America.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is graduate high school. And then don't have kids until you're married. And the third one is hold down a job. And if you do those 3 things, you're very likely to experience success in America. And what's the first one they listed, graduate high school.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've spent a lot of time working with people, kids in the Boys and Girls Club who are from lower socioeconomic brackets, and they don't value the education, right? Because they're worried about other things. They're worried about the fact that they want a relationship with their parents who are never home because they're out working 3 jobs. Or a lot of times in these low socioeconomic brackets, the parent just straight up and leaves, particularly the father. And all of a sudden, you're dealing with one parent in one parent household. It just,
it's rough.
I'm digressing. It just, what do you want to say, snowballs.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I guess from looking at it from the United States standpoint of like what's happening in the United States, I think what we can touch on next is kind of how the military-industrial complex is affecting the world around us.
Yeah.
And we'll save that for our next episode.